Well, welcome everyone. You are about to be treated to some fascinating information by a very professional, experienced person about the connection between food and mental health. My part in this is partly that I am a very enthusiastic supporter of the Fredericksburg Food Co-op. I'm also the local coordinator of NAMI, which is the National Alliance on Mental Illness. So we are co-sponsoring this particular presentation for obvious reasons. We know so well that good nutrition is a huge part of health. Yes, and here's some information that shows how you can learn more about us. We are on internet. We've got a marvelous volunteer who takes the phone calls that you'll see at the number there pretty much 24/7. She can help reduce, oh, she's here. I don't know if there's a quick way to show her, but you can always say that. Lane Arnold. She knows the resources. She can help people sort of calm them down if they're terribly agitated, help them identify what their next key step needs to be and help them get on their way. Just very briefly then, the NAMI program locally does provide services, particularly in the form of support groups. It provides information. We love to give presentations with professionally prepared visuals to local organizations, and we advocate. As you may know, our state legislature is just wrapping up, and some of us have been heavily involved in tracking legislation that deals with particularly the intersection between mental health and the prison system. And some of you are nodding your heads on that one. With that, our presenter is going to be Dr. Christine Thompson. And will you be introducing yourself with your credentials? Because I know. All right, here she is.
Women that's wrong.
Yes, thank you. You can, we have 4 coupons at $25 a piece that you are eligible to win. The way you can participate is by putting your name in the chat box if you are interested. If you are here in presence, in person, make sure that Gloria there has your name on her little card so that you will be part of the drawing. Each one of them is for $25. And they are specifically for purchases at the food co-op.
The gift cards.
The gift cards, when I say coupons, they are gift cards in that they are cash at the food co-op. All right, is that it?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, everybody. Really great to see people coming out for the class, and hello to everybody on Zoom. Glad you are here too. My name is Dr. Christine Thompson, and full disclosure, I am not a mental health professional. It's not my area of expertise, but I am a chiropractor, and nutrition is my area of expertise. So I am approaching this topic from the perspective of my experience in nutrition and what I have learned about the connections with mental health. So when you do just a general Google search on the factors affecting mental health, a lot of different things come up. And usually nutrition does not. And that doesn't take away from the factors that are generally associated with mental health, like your genes and abuse and trauma, and socioeconomic factors and things like that are also very important. But in recent years, we have discovered that there is a very large connection with nutrition and other lifestyle factors. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. So whoops, sorry. Okay, I will get control of this. So I just want to give just a real quick overview of, whoops, sorry. Okay, yeah, okay, sorry. I must be pushing buttons while I'm talking. I tend to move my arms while I'm talking. So, so I want to just kind of give an overview of my perspective on how thoughts and feelings arise. So of course we have thoughts and they arise from our experiences and our memories and things like that. And then those thoughts actually cause our neurons to release chemicals. And these chemicals, some of them are called neurotransmitters. And these neurotransmitters travel from the nerves to the cells of our body. And they actually go into receptors on our cells and they cause physical changes in our cells. And that results in physical feelings. So we actually feel our thoughts in our body due to that. So I'm going to talk a little bit about neurotransmitters. So they are very powerful chemicals, of course, produced by our neurons. And they are made from things that we eat on a daily basis. They're made from amino acids and vitamins and minerals. So I think that that is a really important thing to remember, that if we're going to make appropriate neurotransmitters, we need to have the appropriate nutrients to do that. I also wanted to mention hormones. Hormones are also very powerful chemical messengers that are made by our body. They're a little different because they are made in the glands and they travel through our blood to our cells, but they also make changes in our cells, and some of them act as neurotransmitters. One example is oxytocin, which is kind of a feel-good type of hormone, and it also is made from amino acids. I'm going to talk a little bit more later about amino acids, but they are the building blocks of proteins and are found in a lot of different foods that we eat. So what happens when these neurotransmitters and other chemicals in our body get out of balance? I think probably all of you have heard of serotonin, right? Who's heard of serotonin? Yeah, serotonin is one of our feel-good neurotransmitters, and associated in it, when we're deficient in it, it's associated with depression. And so a very traditional way to deal with depression is antidepressant medications, which help our body to recycle serotonin. But what a lot of people don't realize is that you can actually have too much serotonin, and it's known as serotonin syndrome. And it can cause some very serious side effects. And sometimes for some people, it can be worse than the original depression that they were suffering from. So I mention that because I think we have to have some respect for the balance of the body and the way the body makes these chemicals, and try to do what we can to balance the body. So that's mainly what I'm going to be focusing on today, is how can we balance the body and help our body to produce the chemicals that it needs to feel good. So let's kind of just go very basic with nutrition. So what I like to ask is, what do we need food for? So anybody have any ideas? Just throw out some answers to me. What do we need food for? Why do we eat? Energy. Yes, absolutely. What else? Growth. Absolutely. So at its very most basic, those are the two things that we use food for. We produce energy and we make new cells, right? The very cells of our body are made out of the nutrients that we get from our food. And so is the energy. So this next slide looks very complicated, but I'm basically just showing you that our body can take carbs, fats, and protein and turn it into energy. And every single circle that you see on that chart is a vitamin or a mineral that is necessary for that process to turn carbs, fats, and proteins into energy. Isn't that fascinating what our body can do? But it needs those nutrients to be able to do that. The other thing I wanted to cover is how the very basics of how our body heals. So there's a natural process that goes on, and we don't have to do anything. So we get a cut on our arm and the body automatically produces inflammation. And the purpose for the inflammation is to bring in immune cells that help clear away the debris, clear away dead and injured cells, clear away any bacteria or anything that could have gotten into the cut. And then our body clears away that inflammation and the healing process starts. So inflammation, which everybody's heard of inflammation, right? And have you always heard bad things about inflammation, right? We just only hear bad things about inflammation, but inflammation is the natural process in our body, and it's the beginning of the healing process. But there are some really serious problems with inflammation that I'm going to go over in a few minutes. First, I want to talk about stress. And stress is different from nutrition, and I'm adding some things in here, but I feel like it's essential to cover stress and explain how it changes our nutrition and how it changes our body and how it influences inflammation. So the stress response is designed to save us in an emergency, right? So it's a very good system. It's designed for when our body feels threatened, and it's automatic. You don't have to even think about it. When you feel threatened, you automatically start that stress response cycle that goes on. And so that's a good thing, right? Right, that's a good thing. The problem becomes if stresses happen continuously or daily, nonstop, and we don't ever come out of that stress response. Our bodies are designed for stress and designed to save us in emergency. They are not designed for constant stress. So constant stress produces hormones that will tear down our body over time. The stress response activates the systems that we need in an emergency, like the heart and lungs and the large muscles and the things that we need to save ourselves. And it shuts down other systems that aren't needed in an emergency, like the digestive system. So over time, if you're always in the stress response, you're wearing out the systems that are activated, and you keep the systems that are not activated shut down, and it can really be a huge problem. So you're wearing out the body, you're depleting nutrients and creating a lot of inflammation in the body. So we have to address that also. Now I want to talk about our digestive system. So the digestive system has become really, really critical in the thinking of most of us healthcare providers, and especially those of us that practice like I do in a holistic manner. And it's become known as the second brain. Of course, some scientists are saying it should be called the first brain, because in reality, the gut contains more neurons than the brain. Isn't that wild to think about, that our brain, where we think all of our nerve cells are, actually doesn't have as many neurons as the gut does. So it's known as the enteric nervous system, and it communicates with the brain. So there's this ongoing communication system between the brain and the gut. So there's a couple other things that are really important to remember about the gut. And one is that most of our immune system sits in the gut. Isn't that interesting? So our gut is one of the systems that's exposed on a daily basis to the outside world, right? Right? All the stuff that comes into us goes into the gut, and our body knows that. So most of our immune cells sit in the gut, ready to protect us from that outside world with all its dangers. So the other thing, one more thing that I think is really important, is that we have discovered that about 90% of our serotonin is produced in the gut. How about that? Our neurotransmitter that we think of as being in our brain is actually being produced by our gut. So let's go back to what I talked about a minute ago with the stress response. So if we're under stress all the time, we're activating the heart and lungs and the big muscles, and we're shutting down the digestive system, right? So all those things I just mentioned, that communication going on, and the immune system and serotonin, and all those things are being inhibited by the stress response, okay? So you get a picture here of what's going on. So what we have found with the gut is that this communication that goes on not only is with the nervous system, the enteric nervous system, but the microbes that are in the gut are actually using the neurotransmitters and other chemicals to communicate with our brain. So our little microbes, all our good bacteria that we're so interested in, is communicating with our brain. So they have found that these microbes are intimately tied with mental health and our mood and our well-being. It's a direct connection, and I'll illuminate that a little bit more a little later. But it's a really exciting field where they're discovering particular strains of bacteria that are related to particular mood disorders or particular mental health disorders. And they're doing a lot of these studies with mice and finding how their behavior changes when they just introduce a particular bacterial strain. Is that pretty wild? I know. Yeah, it's pretty interesting. So just to kind of summarize that, there's two ways that our gut communicates with our brain. And one is actual physical connection through the vagus nerve. So the vagus nerve is like the antithesis of the stress response. So we have our stress response activating all of our emergency systems, and then the vagus nerve activates all the non-emergency systems. So it gets that gut going again and gets us digesting food and absorbing our nutrients and all of that. So the vagus nerve is really an important communication system for the gut. And then the other way that our gut communicates with the brain is through chemicals like hormones and neurotransmitters. And as I mentioned before, that the microbes even use those hormones and neurotransmitters to communicate with the brain. So let's talk a little bit now about how our gut gets inflamed and isn't working properly and is working against us and creating, I believe, and especially from what I've read recently, creating a lot of our mental health issues. So gut inflammation, as I said, our gut is like our biggest exposure to the outside world. And it gets inflamed through anything that we're exposed to. So if we're exposed to pesticides, if we're exposed to plastics that have been heated up and are off-gassing carcinogens into us, if we're exposed to antibiotics, if we're exposed to food additives, colorings, flavorings, preservatives, things like that, anything that is irritating to our body and our gut lining can cause some inflammation in the gut. So it's estimated that the average American is exposed to 80,000 different chemicals a day. You know, our bodies are amazing, right? Our bodies can handle a lot, and they have a built-in detoxification system. Our bodies know how to get rid of toxic chemicals, but 80,000, I mean, I think we're asking a little too much of our detox system. And, you know, not all of those are, you know, horrible. Maybe some of them are, maybe we can deal with, but out of 80,000, don't you figure there must be some of those that are pretty dangerous to us? And a lot of them are man-made and new and things that are foreign to our bodies that we're not familiar with, and our bodies really don't know how to handle them. So we really have an overload of toxins and chemicals we're exposed to. So now I'm going to just kind of talk about leaky gut. Who's heard of leaky gut before? Okay. Just about everybody. So we're kind of, I'm just going to go through it real quick then, because I'm assuming everybody sort of understands that. It's basically a problem with the gut when the way the cells work that are lining the intestines. So we have one cell layer thick cells that line the interior of our intestinal lumen. And those cells have between them a space, and it's called a normal tight junction. And it's a tight junction because it only allows through the things that we want, like nutrients, right? Vitamins and minerals and the nutrients and things that we need to make new cells and make energy. So as long as those cells are healthy and the little cilia, see the little cilia there on the top of the cells, those are the things that absorb those nutrients, and then they pass between the cells and they go into the blood. So that red tube that's below those cells that you see in the picture, that's the blood vessel. And so all those nutrients go in the blood and everything's great and your body's getting what it needs. If those cells have been damaged in any way, by inflammation, by toxins, by antibiotics that killed some of our nice, good flora that's protecting those cells. Anything that damages those cells can cause that space to widen between the cells. And now things are passing through those cells and into the blood that shouldn't be there. It can be anything from bad bacteria, toxic chemicals, or proteins that haven't been digested properly and get into the blood and cause problems like allergies and autoimmune disorders. So leaky gut is a real problem, and it has been linked to a lot of health issues, and especially some mental health issues and some neurological issues have been linked to leaky gut. So all kinds of things can go wrong if we're getting toxins into the blood that don't belong there. One of the things that can cause this leaky gut and inflammation in our gut is what we eat, right? So sugar is inflammatory to the intestinal lining and to the blood vessels. Processed food that have chemicals, additives, preservatives, colorings, flavorings, all those kind of things. Anything that's been sprayed with pesticides, any antibiotics that you eat. If you eat any conventional meat, conventional livestock has been given antibiotics because it fattens them up real nice and quickly. So you're getting those antibiotics. So there's lots of things that we eat that can be causing these problems in our gut. And I'm going to talk a little bit further about gluten because I feel like there's a lot of confusion around it, right? Is anybody confused about gluten? Only two people admit to being confused about gluten. The number one question I get is, what's the deal? Gluten's been around for thousands of years and we've been eating wheat for all this time. And well, the problem is we have been eating wheat and other grains that have gluten for a couple thousand years. But the wheat has been hybridized over that couple thousand years, and the gluten, inadvertently, it's not really the goal of hybridization, but the gluten has increased a number of fold. In fact, some estimates are there's 40 times more gluten in wheat today than there was originally when it started being grown. So that's one problem. The next problem is we actually can't break down and digest gluten. Did you know that? Our digestive system does not, gluten is a protein and naturally found in wheat, but our digestive system doesn't break it down. So that's okay if there's just a little bit of gluten, but now there's lots of gluten in not only wheat products, but gluten is added to products because it's a great thickener. So it's added to a lot of things. And then, so we have this problem where we can't digest it. And then we've also discovered, and this is from Dr. David Perlmutter, who wrote Grain Brain, and he's written a bunch of other books about brain inflammation and gluten. And what he had discovered is that the gluten protein crosses the blood-brain barrier. So let's think about this. So if you can't break down gluten and you have leaky gut, that protein can leak right into your blood. It can travel through your blood. It can cross the blood-brain barrier and then cause inflammation in your brain. So gluten is actually a real problem. So how come it's a new problem? Well, because more gluten, right? But also because in the old days, when they made bread, they used to ferment it. And the fermentation process actually breaks down the gluten protein so that we can digest it. So if you eat breads that have been fermented, like sourdough and things like that, I think the magic number is 17 hours of rising and fermenting it. That breaks down the gluten molecules so you can digest it properly. So that's the other problem that has arisen is in recent years, we make this quick bread. And so it has lots of gluten and we can't digest any of the gluten and it's causing a lot of problems for a lot of people. So does that answer some questions? Yeah. Okay, good. So, so if you are a celiac disease person, you have an extreme allergy to gluten and it will cause a loss of, if you see the picture up in the left side of the slide there, the picture on the far left shows the cilia on the top of a cell that's lining the intestinal lumen. And then the next picture next to it shows the cilia have just been destroyed. And that's what the intestinal lining of a person with celiac disease who's been exposed to gluten, or somebody who just has a very high sensitivity to gluten and has been exposed to it, it starts really damaging those cells so they can't absorb properly. So all of that is summarized on this slide. This is kind of my little chart of summarizing what we're talking about. So we're talking about, on the right side of this slide, we're talking about the normal process of inflammation and healing in the body. So we're exposed to toxic chemicals, we have stress in our lives, we have injuries, and we produce inflammation, part of the normal healing process, right? And then our body produces cortisol, which is actually produced by our adrenal glands. And cortisol is our main anti-inflammatory hormone. And so that takes care of the inflammation. And then if we add in some good nutrients, a good healthy diet, and some good probiotics, and maybe even some supplements if we need them, then we resolve that inflammation and we have healing going on. So that's what should be happening, right? And then we look over on the left side of the slide, and here's the reality of what's really happening in America for most people. We have a chronic inflammatory cycle going on. So we have the same toxic chemicals, stresses, injuries going on and producing inflammation, and our body's producing cortisol. But we've now introduced an inflammatory diet that's lacking nutrients. We've introduced antibiotics killing off our good gut flora that's supposed to be protecting our gut lining. And we've introduced, now we have leaky gut and dysbiosis and all sorts of things going on. And so we're just creating more inflammation. And what happens with people is it just becomes a chronic cycle: inflammation, more inflammation, more inflammation, more inflammation. We keep producing cortisol, but cortisol long-term is just as damaging as inflammation. It will break down body tissues, same way as inflammation. So we have a real problem. So what are we going to do about the problem? So the next rest of the class is going to be about how are we going to rebalance the body, restore the body, get the body healing again. And this is called homeostasis. Homeostasis just means balance, and it's what the body's always striving for. Your body wants to be in balance. Did you know that? It really does. And your body knows what homeostasis feels like. So all we have to do is give it a little shove in the right direction and help it along, give it the things that it needs. So here's some of the critical things that we need to achieve homeostasis. We need whole foods, right? So what are whole foods? Not processed, good. So my very simple definition of whole foods is if it looks like it could have grown out of the earth or have been running around on the earth at one time, then it's probably a whole food. If it doesn't even resemble a plant or an animal, it's probably not a whole food, meaning that it has been processed. It's been altered in some way, things taken out, things added in, changed. And so when it's changed too much, it doesn't provide the nutrients we need, and the body doesn't deal with it in the same way. It alters the processes of the body. So we need whole foods, we need water, right? We're mostly water, so we need water to filter through the toxins and to help us out. And we need exercise, we need proper rest. We need to manage our stress well, right? We've got to manage that stress response and activate that vagus nerve. And sometimes we need some supplementation too, right? Some help along the way, because we do know that our soils are depleted, that foods are being grown in, and we know with stress and the life today that we need extra nutrients, sometimes more than what food can provide. So those are the basic kind of critical ingredients. There's probably a lot of other things that you all are probably thinking of right now that we need too, but those are the basic ones. So a lot of the information that I'm going to give you comes from psychiatrists who were trained in a very traditional, conventional kind of method and found that that wasn't working for their patients. And so they educated themselves in integrative or functional medicine. And some of them have written books. My favorite is Kelly Brogan, who wrote A Mind of Your Own. It's an excellent book for anyone, could pick it up and get a lot out of it. She goes through a lot of great explanations of how the body works and then what you need in order to have mental health, in order to have well-being. And she lays it out really well, like what you need to change in your lifestyle. So I highly recommend them, but all of them. The other doctors I'm just not as familiar with. Dr. Bora and Robin Burson, they also wrote books that are excellent. So Dr. Brogan says that depression is a symptom, that it's not a disease. And her take on it is that the underlying cause is inflammation. So just based on what I've covered up till now, does that make sense to you all? Yeah, it makes a lot of sense, right? That depression could be arising from, at its most basic underlying cause, from inflammation in the body and probably in the gut, right? Yeah. So how do we stop this chronic inflammation? Well, change our lives, change everything we're doing. Well, no, I actually, when I work with patients, I recommend just changing one little thing at a time and not overwhelming yourself, because change is hard, right? Change is not easy. So we need to change things a little bit at a time, but basically we've got to reduce our stress response, right? Can you imagine that we're not going to stop chronic inflammation if we're constantly activating the systems of our body that are responding to an emergency and shutting down our digestion, right? There's no way that we're going to be healthy and have well-being and mental health. Another thing that I like to mention is non-steroidal anti-inflammatories. So I would say that a good 80 to 90% of the people that come into my office in pain tell me they're taking ibuprofen. And the problem with that is this. So ibuprofen is a non-steroidal anti-inflammatory. It stops inflammation, right? But it stops it by breaking the normal resolution of inflammation. So our body has, if I showed it in a picture, it would be mind-boggling, but there's all this cascade of these different chemicals and things that are produced to resolve the inflammation and promote healing. And the non-steroidal anti-inflammatories, or NSAIDs, just break that in half and stop it, so you don't ever come to that resolution phase of inflammation. So when you stop taking the ibuprofen, you go right back into inflammation. So the way I say it is, NSAIDs cause chronic inflammation. You're just causing a chronic cycle of it because you're never resolving it. This is not true of herbal anti-inflammatories. Herbal anti-inflammatories will not work as quickly as ibuprofen, because what the herbals are doing is they're promoting the natural process of resolution of inflammation. And this has been proven scientifically. They've gone through all the chemicals, and I'm not going to go through all the chemicals with you, but it's an important point, I feel like. We have to reduce our chemical exposure, right? We have to do the best we can. But there's some things we don't have control over out there, but there's things that we do have control over in our lives. And we have to increase our antioxidants. Do you all know what antioxidants are? They're basically the nutrients in foods that protect our cells. So I think of them as like a casing around our cells that protect our cells from damage. So all these toxins and molecules are bombarding our cells and trying to damage them, and the antioxidant protects them from that damage. And we want to increase anti-inflammatory foods. So what are anti-inflammatory foods? You all can guess by now. Basically, you know, almost all whole foods have some anti-inflammatory properties, right? Because they're full of nutrients, and these nutrients are anti-inflammatory. So, you know, this is my little list here, but you could find 10 other lists of anti-inflammatory foods, and just keep looking at lists till you find the foods you like. If you don't like any of these, you'll be able to find some that you do like. But basically, the wild-caught cold water oily type fish have a lot of omega-3 fatty acids, and the omega-3 fatty acids are anti-inflammatory, where the processed foods have a lot of omega-6 fatty acids, and those are pro-inflammatory. So that's the difference there. And then I like to mention cruciferous vegetables. Do you all know what those are? There's a whole bunch of them right over there in the co-op. The cruciferous vegetables are things like Brussels sprouts and broccoli and cauliflower and kale and onions and beets and, you know, all the things that are pretty stinky. And the reason that they're stinky is they all contain sulforaphanes, and sulforaphanes help your liver to get rid of toxic chemicals. So they are wonderful for your liver and wonderful for getting rid of toxins. You always want to cook the cruciferous because most of them are a little bit hard to digest if you don't cook them. So you want to cook them a little bit and break them down a little bit. And then, of course, berries have lots of antioxidants, and there's all kinds of different berries that have antioxidants. And then there's a lot of anti-inflammatory herbs that have actually today there's a lot of research behind herbals now. You know, it used to be the big complaint that I would hear, well, there's no research, but there is a lot now showing these properties of these herbals. So a lot of powerful anti-inflammatory herbs. All right, I had to put in this slide on mushrooms because number one, I'm infatuated with mushrooms. And number two, there is so much literature now on the health benefits of mushrooms. There's just all kinds of things coming out all the time. And so I found this is just a few of the things that relate to mental health, but you know, and just plain old button mushrooms that you see everywhere. In the grocery store, they have potassium that can help with anxiety. And of course, lion's mane is really popular now and very much helps with the immune system and inflammation. But they've discovered that it promotes nerve growth. How about that? That's a recent discovery for lion's mane. And then the amino acids that are found in abundance in most mushrooms are this particular amino acid, the ergothioneine, is found to be anti-inflammatory. You can find it in other foods too, but it's very abundant in mushrooms. All right, so let's talk a little bit more about our microbiome because it's just one of the most fascinating topics in healthcare. So way back when they started the Human Genome Project, they were just convinced that they were going to find orders of magnitude more genes in the human genome than they actually found. So they found, I think it's like between 22,000 and 25,000 genes in human genes. And that equates to about what an earthworm has. So when they discovered that number, they just couldn't, it didn't make any sense. So they are trying to explain the complexity of human beings. And one of the factors, so lots more research has been done since then, and one of the factors that they've discovered that starts to explain the complexity of human beings is that we have a microbial population inside of us and on us that is about up to 10 times more than the actual human cells in our body. So we have a lot more bacteria and viruses and funguses and things all in us and on us than we actually have human cells. And each one of these microbes has a whole set of genes. They can have like 500 to 1,000 genes themselves. So it's estimated that the microbes are contributing up to 2 million genes to our entire microbiome when you look at the whole human being. And they are heavily influencing our health and our both our physical and mental health and our physical and mental ill health. So they are a huge area of study and really just fascinating what they're discovering. So as I said before, these microbes communicate with our brains, but they also have a whole host of other things that they do in our gut and on our skin and everywhere in our body, actually. They protect our gut. They can produce vitamins. They can synthesize vitamins for us, right? They do all kinds of different things that help protect us, and they have been directly associated with particular health issues. So the thought is now in medicine, they're going to start producing specific strains of probiotics for specific disorders. Isn't that fascinating? We'll see if it really happens, but this is where the studies are leading. So for depression, they'll have a specific strain of probiotic, and they have actually found specific strains to help with depression and anxiety and things like that. So it's really a very interesting time to be looking into mental health and other ways to deal with it rather than the traditional role of pharmaceuticals has taken in the field. So how can we help to improve our microbiome? There's a lot we can do, and the very simplest thing you can do is just go outside and take a walk in the woods. Because when you're out amongst the trees and plants and on the earth, you're breathing in a whole ton of microbes that can be very beneficial to you. And if you have a pet, pets provide, you pet your cat or your dog, they provide some microbes for us. Another thing that we can do is to eat fermented foods and drink fermented vegetables. So way back when, if you look historically in all the cultures of the earth, almost every culture had some kind of specific fermented food or beverage that it was a regular part of their diet and was just passed down generation to generation. In America, for a while, we kind of forgot about that, but it's becoming much more popular now. And you can go back, there's a couple of sections here in the co-op that have a wonderful supply of fermented vegetables and fermented beverages too. So yogurt, kimchi, tempeh, miso, and natto are all fermented soy products, and that's actually the best way to eat soy. Sauerkraut, kombucha is fermented tea, and kefir is fermented milk. And then there's all kinds of fermented cheeses too. So the key with the cheeses is either they need to be made from raw milk that's not been pasteurized, or they need to have been aged at least 6 months to have any live spores still in them. Okay, so supplementation. So supplementation, I feel like, is very individual. To know what somebody needs, I need to know more about their lifestyle and their health and what their blood testing is showing and different things that I look at. But there are certain things that we can just say across the board. And the Institute for Functional Medicine has really correlated these nutrients that are listed on the slide, magnesium, folate, B12, and omega-3 fatty acids with depression, as these being deficient in people with depression, and that taking these supplements really makes a difference for depression. So and I do find that they are pretty deficient in a lot of people. Some additional nutrients that I find kind of universally deficient: vitamin D. I'm starting to believe that every person in Virginia is deficient in vitamin D for various reasons. We could actually do a whole class on vitamin D. There's a lot of reasons for it, but people do seem to be, especially this time of year. Now we've been without the sun for a while, and people really need vitamin D. Zinc is another one. Zinc is very important for the immune system, and people just seem to be deficient in it. And then B vitamins, and that may just be diet, depending on what type of diet you're on. A lot of people do seem to be pretty low in the B vitamins besides folate and B12, some of the other B vitamins too. So I do always recommend whole food vitamins. And so I just want to real quickly, I don't want to spend a lot of time on it, but so most vitamins that you see, like if you go out to the drugstore, to Costco or somewhere, what you're seeing is what's known as synthetic vitamins. It just means they've been made in a laboratory, and they are not made from food. They're made from non-food substances, and they're not a whole complex. So legally, vitamin C is ascorbic acid. And so all you have to put into a bottle is ascorbic acid to call it vitamin C. But so the rectangle that you see at the top of the screen there, that shows you all the different components that are actually necessary to have the vitamin C complex that your body can use. So your body needs all those other things to be able to use the ascorbic acid effectively. So I'm not saying that synthetic vitamins should never be taken, because they can be helpful in certain health conditions. And but I think most of the time we need to get our vitamins either from food, or we need to take supplements that have been made from whole foods. All right, so I told you I would go through the amino acids. And basically, there's a whole bunch of amino acids, but 9 of them are what's known as essential. And that means that we can't make them in our body. We have to get them from food. And so I listed the 9 essential amino acids there. Amino acids are the building blocks of protein. Amino acids are what your DNA uses to make the proteins of your body. And a lot of these essential amino acids are directly related to mental health conditions. In fact, some of them are used to treat mental health conditions in medicine. So, it is important that you get all of your essential amino acids. You don't have to eat the protein of muscle meat of animals. You can get all the essential amino acids from other foods, grains and nuts and seeds and vegetables. You just have to eat a varied diet to make sure you're getting all of those, and whole foods. Okay, so I know this whole talk is on nutrition, but I just couldn't do the class without mentioning exercise. I had to stick this in there because exercise is so completely connected to mental health. In fact, the American Psychological Association has stated that exercise works as well, or maybe even better, than antidepressant pharmaceutical medications. How about that? That's a big admission there. And this is my favorite book on exercise. It's an old one, but it's still my favorite, by John Rady, Spark. And he goes through tons and tons and tons of research and study that just keeps on corroborating the effects on depression and anxiety and learning and brain development, and everything with exercise. It's just an amazing book. I highly recommend it. I also could not finish the class without mentioning sleep. So you could be doing everything perfectly, eating perfectly and getting your exercise and drinking your water and managing your stress and just doing beautifully. But if you're not getting the sleep that you need, you cannot have optimal mental health. Period. It's just the way it is. So I highly recommend this book, Why We Sleep, by this really smart guy, Matthew Walker. It's a fascinating book, and he goes through tons of research that will either scare you to death or inspire you to get better sleep. But yeah, sleep, a lack of sleep changes our hormones so dramatically that you just can't be well without adequate sleep and the cycles of sleep that you need. So you can't just take a sleeping pill, a pharmaceutical medication and solve it, because that doesn't allow you to get the cycles of REM sleep that you need. So I won't go into more of that, but it's really very interesting when he discusses why we need REM sleep and non-REM sleep and what it's all for, and very interesting stuff. I also wanted to just mention some of my favorite herbals that I use with patients for depression and anxiety. Ashwagandha, I absolutely love. It actually lowers cortisol in the evening, so it can help with relaxation and getting to sleep. Great herb. Turmeric, of course, is just well known for its anti-inflammatory properties. The only one I would probably use a little caution on is St. John's wort. It's a really wonderful herb and works wonderfully, but it interacts with a lot of medications, so you just have to check contraindications before you use St. John's wort. Ginseng is great with for energy levels, and chamomile and lavender, of course, are relaxing. And kava kava is probably my favorite for anxiety. I feel like it just has is a little bit stronger than some of the herbs in working with anxiety. Okay, so in conclusion, how am I doing it? I asked you to put the clock up there and then never checked it. I'm doing good though. So in conclusion, what do we need to do to create mental health, to create this homeostasis, this balance in our body? Well, we've got to reduce the things that are causing injury and insult, right? And we've got to encourage the natural regenerative powers of our body. And we've got to provide our body with the things that it needs to create that balance, the basic ingredients and the basic nutrients that it needs. Otherwise, we can't produce new cells, we can't produce energy, right? We can't heal, we can't get better if we don't have those nutrients. So that's the basics of it. There's so many more details that I could have provided, but maybe this can branch off into other classes. And I think this should be like a whole mushroom class, don't y'all? Yeah. So that's all. So any questions? Anybody have any questions? We have a few minutes left. Rich?
There's a question from the Zoom Deborah asked, where do you find a variety of mushrooms? Could you repeat the question?
Where do I find a variety of mushrooms?
Where can one find a variety?
Where can one find a variety? That's a really good question. At the co-op, absolutely has the best variety of mushrooms. There's like at least at least five different kinds back there, right? Yeah, so the co-op, as far as if you're looking for a grocery store, otherwise you have to go to like somebody who grows them or farms them. Farmers market, there is somebody that brings mushrooms there, or you'd have to forage, take a class on mushrooms. Yes. There's lion's mane here? Oh, okay, I missed that. Wonderful. Oh, I'm excited. I'm going to go back there before I leave. In powdered form, lion's mane and powder. Yeah. Another question? Right here.
Does cooking the cruciferous vegetables reduce as far as how much they help?
Does cooking cruciferous vegetables reduce their ability to help? No, it actually releases it. There's certain foods that need to be cooked, and mushrooms, one of them. Mushrooms have to be cooked to get the nutrient value out, and cruciferous vegetables have to be cooked to get the nutrient value out of them. Yeah, yep. And there was another. Go ahead. So aspirin is, is aspirin better than ibuprofen? So aspirin is not a NSAID. Aspirin is acetaminophen. No, acetaminophen is Tylenol. A salicylic acid, and it doesn't cause as much damage to the gut lining. In fact, I don't think I even talked about that, but NSAIDs actually cause leaky gut. I think I forgot to mention that. But anyway, it doesn't cause that, but it does cause problems to the liver and the kidneys. It can cause damage there. So I'm not really, and it also thins the blood, so you have to be a little careful with it. But I'm not a medical doctor, and I'm actually not even supposed to advise on that. So, you know. Another question? Mm-hmm. I am. I'm Christine Thompson. Yeah. Oh. Okay, she's asking if I have any classes scheduled, and I do not at this time. I do have a YouTube channel, and some of my past classes are on there. Not very many of them, but there are a few of them on there. But we can let you know if I schedule any classes. Thanks for asking, Rich.
Lynn is asking about
herbal anti-inflammatories. So I did have them on one of the slides, but there's tons of them. Most herbals have some sort of anti-inflammatory property to them. My favorites are turmeric, boswellia, which is frankincense, ginger, garlic, there's tons of them. There's just tons of anti-inflammatory herbs. We could go on, but those are some of my favorites.
Deborah is asking, could you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Well, I'm a chiropractor for 26 years now in Fredericksburg, downtown Fredericksburg, and I have 2 children and 4 grandchildren, and I do my very best to follow my recommendations that I've just gone through here with you, but nobody's perfect. And that was something else I wanted to say, is that, you know, follow the 80-20 rule. If you do really well 80% of the time, you can afford to fudge a little bit, and nobody can do perfectly all the time with their diet. So I'm not sure what else you want to know about me, but that's the basics.
Lynn is also asking about whether you can take those anti-inflammatories when you have a backache.
Yes. So can you take anti-inflammatory herbs when you have a backache? I do recommend, especially the boswellia, and I recommend that it be taken with food, especially if you're eating something high in fat, it gets absorbed better. And that's probably my favorite one for backache, is the boswellia. Yeah. Is that all the questions? We have a drawing, and Gloria's going to come up here and do the drawing for the gift certificates. Oh, you're going to let me do the drawing. Okay, here's the first one. You, of course. Okay, the first name is Bill Brooks. He's on Zoom. Hi, Bill. I didn't know you were on Zoom. And the next one is Carolyn Vinci.
She's right here.
Oh.
She's gonna run the book tonight.
Wonderful. Next one is Carrie Soto.
It's Carrie.
Carrie. And one more is Ruth Stone.
She's on Zoom.
Hi, Ruth.
She's here.
All right. Okay, so we're all done. Thank you all so much. You were the best audience, and thank you all of you who are on Zoom. I can't see you, but I'm glad you were there. Thank you.